Welcome to Holy Apostles College and Seminary MOOC on John Paul II's Social Magisterium. My name is Dr. Cynthia Tulin, and I will be covering some of John Paul II's Social Magisterium in the next 4 lessons. In each lesson, you will see that there are a lot of quotations from John Paul II on each slide. What I've done is edit and rearrange those words in such a way that they're easily understandable by the student. My point is that this is not my original work. You will also notice that I use the word man frequently. I'm using the word man in the generic sense of human being. At the end of each lesson, you will find a true or false quiz, which you can take to determine how much you have learned from that week's lesson. At the end of the MOOC, you will find a true or false final exam, which you can take to determine how much you have learned from the entire MOOC. In each of the 4 lessons, I cover at least part of one of John Paul II's documents. I strongly suggest that you read the entire document carefully. That way you will gain more information from this process. With that being said, let's move on to Lesson 1. John Paul II's encyclical on work, which came out in 1981. We will only consider the following important concepts in this very important document: the meaning of work, work in the objective and subjective sense, the great workbench, the rights of the worker, the spheres of work, indirect and direct employer, and economism. We start with a definition. What is work? John Paul II said that work means any activity by man, whether manual or intellectual, whatever its nature or circumstances. It means any human activity that can and must be recognized as work, in the midst of all the many activities of which man is capable, and to which he is predisposed by his very nature, by virtue of humanity itself. So when John Paul II refers to work, he is not referring to just what we do for pay, although that would be included. Man is in the visible universe as an image and likeness of God, and to subdue the earth, and of course we know, to procreate. From the beginning, man is called to work. It is one of the characteristics distinguishing man from other creatures. Their activity cannot be called work. Only man is capable of work, and only man works, and work occupies his existence on earth. Work bears the mark of a person operating within a community of persons. This mark decides its interior characteristics. In a sense, it constitutes its very nature. The Church speaks out about work. It is at the center of the social question, and accordingly, it's at the center of Catholic social teaching. The central issue used to be the class question. More recently, it is the world question. What he's saying is the center is class, but in consideration of the world sphere of inequality and injustice. The question of work is the key to the social question. Human work is a constant factor of social life and the Church's teaching. The Church's social teaching finds its source in Scripture, in Genesis, the Gospels, and the writings of the Apostles. If we try to see the social question from the point of view of man's good, work is probably the essential key. If the gradual solution of the social question must be sought in making life more human, human work is of fundamental and decisive importance. Work is a fundamental dimension of man's existence on earth. We can see this in the book of Genesis. We know this from Revelation and the social sciences. So this is a conviction of faith and of science. In Genesis, God commanded man be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it. These words indirectly say that work is an activity for man to carry out in the world. Man is the image of God. When he works, he reflects God's action. Now here's an important concept. Work is a transitive activity. It begins in man and is directed towards an external object. That's important because when we try to subdue the earth, it means all the resources that the earth, and indirectly the visible world, contains, and which, through the conscious activity of man, can be discovered and used for his ends. This is a universal process, regardless of generation or phase of economic or cultural development. It takes place within each human being. Each and every individual takes part in the giant process whereby man subdues the earth through his work. We now turn to the objective and subjective sense of work. In the objective sense, we're really talking about technology. Man's dominion over the earth is achieved through work. In the objective sense, man dominates the earth by domesticating animals and extracting natural resources from the earth and the seas. For instance, he makes clothes and food from animals. He subdues the earth when he cultivates it and transforms its products, adapting them to his own use. For instance, he plants food from seeds, he harvests the food. It seems now like machines work and man supervises them. But man works. He uses the machine as a tool. Again, we're talking about technology. Technology is positive and negative. It facilitates work, perfects, accelerates, and augments it. It leads to an increase in the quantity of things produced, and it often improves their quality. But at the same time, it can take away personal satisfaction, the incentive to creativity, and it can deprive workers of their jobs. In the subjective sense, man is the subject of work. Work in the subjective sense is very important. Man is a person, the subject of work. Through it, man manifests and confirms that he is the one who dominates. Work has an ethical value linked to the fact the one who carries it out is a person, a conscious and free subject who decides about himself. We can see this in the gospel of work. Jesus devoted most of the years of his life on earth to manual work. Work is valued because a person is doing it, not on the basis of the kind of work being done. The sources of the dignity of work are in the subjective dimension, not the objective one. The conclusion? Man is destined for work and called to it, but work is for man, and not man for work. Types of work can be rated in the objective sense, but it is always man who is the purpose of the work, regardless of the type of work being done, even if it is rated as service, or as monotonous, or even alienating work. It is possible to have a threat to the right order of values. Some people think work is a type of merchandise that the worker, especially industrial ones, sells to the employer. The employer owns all the tools needed for the worker to make the product. Most people would not say this today, but there is always the danger of treating work as merchandise, or as an impersonal force needed for production. Work is evaluated this way because of a materialistic civilization. It places more importance to the objective aspect of work over the subjective one. This is a confusion or reversal of the order God stated. Man is not an instrument of production, but the subject of work and its true maker. Let's turn to worker solidarity. Because man is its subject, work is one and unrepeatable every time. In its objective dimension, there are many kinds of work. As civilization develops, this becomes more apparent, although while new forms of work appear, others disappear. This is the process that led to the worker question and led to a just social reaction. The worker movement began with a call to solidarity and common action, especially to industrial workers. This reaction was against the degradation of man as the subject of work and the accompanying exploitation in wages, working conditions, and social security for the worker. Many profound changes have occurred since then. For instance, workers often share in running businesses. Through associations, workers influence conditions of work and pay. Yet in many countries, flagrant injustices persist or new ones have been created. In the past, some social groups were not included in such movements. Now these are the ones who are undergoing a proletarianization. For instance, intellectuals are often unemployed or underemployed. To achieve social justice in the various parts of the world, in the various countries, and in the relationship between them, there is a need for ever new movements of solidarity of the workers and with the workers. There is personal dignity related to work. After the fall, that is original sin, God said, "In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread." Sometimes work is accompanied with heavy toil, but work remains the means by which man achieves dominion over the world and subjecting the earth. Toil is universally known and experienced. Yet work is a good thing for man. It is useful, something to enjoy, and it is worthy. It corresponds to, expresses, and increases man's dignity. Work is a good thing for man, for his humanity, because through it he transforms nature, adapting it to his own needs, and he achieves fulfillment as a human being, and in a sense, he becomes more a human being. In work, although matter gains in nobility, man should not experience a lowering of his dignity. The first sphere of values is the personal dimension of work, and that's what we have been talking about. Now we move on to the next two. The second is the family, and it has to be linked to work. Work makes family life and its upkeep possible. It is the means of subsistence, and it helps the purposes of the family be achieved, especially education. The family is one of the most important terms of reference for shaping the social and ethical order of human work. The family is a community made possible by work and the first school of work within the home for every person. The third sphere of values is the great society man belongs to according to his cultural and historical links. Even if it is not yet a nation, it is the great educator of every man, even though an indirect one. Every individual absorbs within the family the contents and values that go to make up the culture of a given nation. It is a great historical and social incarnation of all the work of all generations. Man's identity is tied to his nation. He wants his work and the work of his compatriots to increase the common good of the nation, and he knows his work adds to the heritage of all the people in the world. To summarize these three spheres, they are important for human work in its subjective dimension. It takes precedence over the objective dimension. In the subjective dimension, dominion over the world of nature is accomplished. Man is called to this from the beginning, according to the words of Genesis. The process of subduing the earth, that is, by work, is marked in the course of history by an immense development of technology. This is an advantageous and positive phenomenon if the objective dimension of work does not gain the upper hand over the subjective dimension, depriving man of his dignity and inalienable rights, or reducing them. This leads to the concept of the rights of the worker, and we have to understand them within the broad context of human rights, because the human rights that flow from work belong to the fundamental rights of the person. Work is a duty, a moral obligation. God commanded it, and man's humanity requires it. He must work for his own support and development, and out of regard for others, his family, society, and country, and the whole human family. He inherits the work of previous generations and shares in building the future of those who will come after him. The duty to work and the corresponding rights of the worker must be thought of in the relationship between the direct and indirect employer and the worker. The direct employer is the person or institution with whom the worker enters into a work contract in accordance with definite conditions. The indirect employer exercises influence on the shaping of the work contract and consequently of just or unjust relationships in the field of human labor. A little bit more about direct and indirect employer. The indirect employer impacts the direct employer's conduct regarding concrete terms of the work contract and labor relations. To establish an ethically correct labor policy, all these influences must be kept in mind. A policy is correct when the objective rights of the worker are fully respected. Often we think of the indirect employer as the state because it must conduct a just labor policy. The concept of the indirect employer must include all the elements that are decisive for economic life within a given society and state, and by much wider links and forms of dependence between states. The attainment of the workers' rights cannot be determined as a result of economic systems which are largely concerned with maximum profit. Respect for rights of every kind of worker must constitute the adequate and fundamental criterion for shaping the whole economy of the individual society and state, and of their international relationships. The employment issue comes to play here. Indirect employers must put systems in place to deal with the issue of suitable employment for all who are capable of it, and to provide unemployment benefits based on the principle of the common use of goods or the right to life and subsistence. It must provide overall planning as regards the different kinds of work by which the economic and cultural life is shaped. And it must organize work in a correct and rational way. There must be a just and rational coordination in this work according to the principle of subsidiarity. The sovereign right of each society and state must be protected in the field of planning and organizing labor in its own society. Action must be taken for international collaboration, for instance, treaties and agreements. International organizations must be aware of natural, historical, civil, and other such circumstances. Progress, and the best way to verify it, is the continual reappraisal of man's work in its objective and subjective aspects. One test is the recognition of the purpose of work and universal respect for the rights inherent in work. Planning and organization should lead to the discovery of the right proportions between different kinds of work, according to the capabilities of individuals and for the common good of society and all of mankind. There should be a matching system of instruction and education aimed at developing mature people prepared to find an appropriate place in the world of work. We see many conspicuous natural resources remain unused, while many people are unemployed or underemployed, and multitudes are hungry. This shows there is something wrong with the organization of work and employment on both the local and global level. Wages and other social benefits also have to be considered. The most important way to secure a just relationship between the employer, especially the direct one, and the worker is on the basis of wage, that is, just pay for work done. It is a practical means that gives people access to the goods of nature and manufactured goods. A just wage is the concrete means of verifying the justice of the whole socioeconomic system, and is the key means of checking that it is functioning justly. Some rights. The labor process must be organized and adapted to respect the requirements of the person and his forms of life. For instance, life in the home, the individual's age and sex. Wages and social benefits intended to ensure the life and health of workers and their families are important. Medical assistance should be available for workers and, if possible, inexpensive or free. Second is the right to rest, regular weekly rest, and also a vacation. Third is the right to a pension and to insurance for old age and in case of accidents at work. These principal rights develop a system of particular rights which, together with pay for work, determine the correct relationship between worker and employer. These should include the right to a safe and healthy working environment. Lastly, a few words about unions. Unions are important. They grew from the struggle of the workers, especially industrial ones, to protect their just rights. History teaches that these organizations are an indispensable element of social life. Catholic social teaching does not think unions reflect the class structure or are a mouthpiece for a class struggle. They struggle for social justice, or the just rights of workers. Work unites people. It can build community. Workers and managers or owners must be united in this community. Labor and capital are both indispensable components to the production process. One method used by unions is the strike, a kind of ultimatum, especially to employers. It is legitimate in the proper conditions and within just limits. Workers should not be subject to sanctions for taking part in a strike. Strikes are an extreme means and must not be abused. If essential community services are in question, they must be ensured, if necessary, by means of appropriate legislation.